Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Full 10 Yards NFL podcast. I'm your host Sam Moores, and today I am joined once again by the very familiar face to this podcast, Shaun Blundell. How are you doing today, Shaun, mate?
Yeah, good, mate. Nice to be back on in familiar surroundings. Said I'd pop up every now and again, and as we've left the dog's dinner of the South till the end, mate, I've obviously stepped in when no one else was willing to take the plunge. So yeah, good to be back on, mate.
That's all right, mate. Yeah, the South has got a bit of a reputation at the moment that it's a bit both the AFC and the NFC South, and they're both not the best quality divisions, but the races, at least for the NFC South, are going to go into the wire really. So it's still a very wide open title race. That one is anyway. Every single one of these teams actually does look considerably different to what it did last year as well. They've all had big changes in some sort to what they were in 2022. Two of the three quarterbacks led in the first round of this year's draft will start for teams in these divisions too. And also, just before we actually get into this podcast, just got to plug something for the Full 10 Yards brand, because I'd like to remind everyone that for the first time ever, Full 10 Yards are hosting an event to kick off the 2023 NFL season. On the 10th of September, the first Sunday of the NFL season, you can join our team and fellow UK fans in watching every game at Falcons in Birmingham. The tickets are now free as well, or you can buy a bundle that includes a drink too, and there's always discounts on drinks and stuff as well. It's all on the website. Come along and meet some fellow UK-based NFL fans and beat me, because I'm awful at game of pool or shuffleboard as well. Visit www.full10yards.co.uk to buy your ticket and or guide as well, because the guide, there's still some both physical and digital to be sold as well. So while stocks last, go and grab your guide. And we've done a lot of work on that, and it was great to do that. But I'm looking forward to meeting you all at the event, and that'd be fun to do. As always with this podcast, with these division previews, we'll start at the AFC and we'll go to the Colts. You have a new quarterback for 2023 in Anthony Richardson. They're a team in transition. They've got a new head coach in Shane Steichen. The GM, Chris Ballard, is very much in the hot seat. He's basically drafted Anthony Richardson to save his job. And he joins a team that struggled for offense last year because the Matt Ryan experiment just did not work whatsoever, did it?
Now, let's be honest, the Colts have been seemingly experimenting for the last, 4 or 5 years, it seems now, with sort of journeyman quarterbacks who have had stellar careers prior to the move to Indianapolis, but it's always seemed to move too far. I actually wrote about the Colts for the said season guide that you just rightfully plugged there, mate. And when I was looking at it, for me, this season for the Colts is all about what Anthony Richardson develops into, because he's extremely raw. There's a train of thought that he may be the most talented, certainly athletically, and all those type of things coming out of the draft at the quarterback position. But there's obviously a reason he was the third one selected, considering that he's potentially got those credentials about him. He's extremely raw. He's going to a team that doesn't necessarily have a ton of weapons outside. We'll come on to the skill players and everything shortly, I'm sure, so I won't dwell on that point too much for now. But for me, it was likely that Gardner Minshew would take the job at the start of the season. It was always just going to be a case of how long do they let it go? Do they let it go to 2-4, 2-5, 2-6, whatever the record may be? Because you know what you're going to get with Gardner Minshew. He was obviously a little bit of a Cinderella story himself in Jacksonville for a short period of time. Obviously spent some time at the Eagles as a backup there. Felt as though he'd landed an opportunity to potentially reclaim a starting berth. But I think it's the right thing for the longevity of this franchise. They need to understand what they have got in Anthony Richardson. And hopefully for them, look, if nothing else, he'll bring an element of excitement. And it's probably going to be the first time somebody under the age of 35 has been quarterback for the Colts since Andrew Luck played, hasn't it? So if nothing else, like I say, it should give them some hope for the future.
Yeah, and he was named starter last week. He's actually a third quarterback in this rookie quarterback in this podcast that we talk about, because when I wrote the notes originally for this podcast, he wasn't announced as a starter yet, and obviously I said last week I was ill last week, so it's all been put in the back burner. But there are three rookie quarterbacks I'm going to be talking about today. One of them is Richardson, and I think it's an interesting approach because he's very raw. It will take longer than most in the most QBs in the league to adjust to it because of just his nature. He's similar to the likes of Jalen Hurts in that sense, where he's not an accomplished thrower by any means. But if anyone was to help him do that, it would be Shane Steichen, who was a big impact in Hurts' massive breakout year last year, going from a QB who was struggling on the lower end of accuracy to being one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league last year. And obviously they're hoping that Richardson can sort of develop his tools with a guy who was a great OC in Philly last year. So if anyone was to help Richardson develop, it would be Shane Steichen. And I get it on the other hand where it's like the team aren't great, so you're gonna. It's either you have Gardner Minshew and you get 3 wins, or you have Anthony Richardson and you get 3 wins. At least you'll know a year later what Anthony Richardson is, and when you wouldn't know, you didn't have that before with Gardner Minshew. So if it makes sense. If you know the team's going to suck, then don't play him, because what are you gonna get from holding him on the sidelines for a bit too long? You're probably gonna have the same result in the first place. So I do understand that. Another update that has happened with the Colts in the last 24 hours. Running back Jonathan Taylor has requested or has been granted permission to seek a trade, with a few teams rumored to be interested. One of them, the Miami Dolphins, who missed out on Dalvin Cook when he went to the New York Jets. What do you think happens with Jonathan Taylor? Obviously, we've had this whole Jim Irsay and him back and forth. There's been a fake injury in there. Do you think ultimately he stays with the Colts? Do you think he moves on? And I've seen GMs say that they think it's going to be like a second or a third round pick for Taylor, which you're going to have to pay him, but that's similar to the price of Christian McCaffrey. And both of them have had injury issues, and McCaffrey more so than Taylor. So that's a quite good compensation if it is the case.
I've been as big a supporter of running backs as anybody in my time hosting this podcast. I know it's a position that goes undervalued, but I think there are a few that really stand out from the crowd. And I think Jonathan Taylor has the potential to be included in that category. Obviously a really stellar 2021 curtailed by injury in 2022. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a risk there. You don't know whether you're getting the 2021 version or not. And I suppose proof will ultimately be in the pudding. But the ultimate one is what you just said there, mate. If someone's going to trade that kind of compensation at this stage, you're almost then signing up to that contract extension. And it's what number do you put on a running back contract extension? We've seen some stellar running backs get paid. We've seen plenty of buyer's remorse once those deals have struck. You think of Ezekiel Elliott at the Cowboys is probably the prime example. It was a contract that at the time, when you've also got to pay Dak Prescott as it was, and they had to pay Amari Cooper as it was, it always felt like one was going to ultimately be a bit of a sacrificial lamb. I don't know. Ultimately, now they've not got either Cooper or Zeke, but obviously Zeke, if you like, has been the one that has been the sort of cap casualty, if you like, that was always on the horizon. So I think it's an interesting one. You can understand it from his perspective. He can probably see what's happening in the running back market and thinks, well, realistically, I've probably maybe got 3 years left. At the sort of peak of my powers, if you like. So if he could sign a 4-year deal somewhere, he may well see that out in terms of 3 years of guaranteed money, potential for a fourth, which he probably knows deep down he might not ever see. But I think he's got the potential to do that. He's still young. He entered the league as a young rookie, if you like, at 21. So he hasn't got a huge amount of tread on the tyres for a running back. And look, certainly from a talent perspective, a team like the Dolphins, I think, would be an absolute dream for them. Like you say, to be interested in Dalvin Cook and end up with somebody that's probably better, certainly younger, certainly less tread on the tyres, would be really interesting. it's one of those awkward ones though, because you look around the rest of the roster, and I know we're going to come on to the other positions, and he's obviously the one that stands out, if you like, on the depth chart as the real key piece that you would almost be looking to build an offense around. And we talk all the time about the importance of rookie quarterback. Best friend is often the running back, isn't he? Get the run game and take the pressure off. Now, if you take Jonathan Taylor out of it, you've got Zach Moss, who's probably second on the depth chart, sat around at Buffalo for the best part of a few years. Buffalo's run game has not been anything particularly special to talk about. It's been heavily reliant on
Josh
the
Allen.
pass game. Yeah, exactly. And then you look further down the depth chart, Kenyon Drake, bounced around, veteran journeyman, Jake Funk. There's not a lot there. I know people have this impression that running backs are a dime a dozen. Um, I have a slightly different view of that. Comes from possibly having the best running back in the league play for my team, which obviously helps and probably does give me a little bit of bias. But I would certainly want, as a Colts fan, to have Jonathan Taylor sticking around. And unless someone's willing to, like I say, sacrifice a fair bit in terms of not only draft capital, but more importantly, that cap space for the next 3 years, it could well be that he ends up sticking around anyway.
Yeah, well, he's going to want 12 million plus a year. Maybe you're going up to 15 million, which is a lot for running back. But we'll see what happens with that. I'll keep you updated next week with a couple podcasts coming next week. On to the rest of the roster. It's not great, which obviously if they lose Taylor, it's one of the worst in the NFL, I'd say. We got good line play and a run game, but obviously if Taylor goes, and we don't know what's going there. They're not really the best at receiver or corner either. They signed Isaiah McKenzie. You mentioned Zach Moss. There's another guy who's played in Buffalo. The receiver, lots of depth, but no real star guy, which most teams have nowadays. Maybe Michael Pittman Jr. could break out in this new offensive with Steichen, but not really sure. He's been around that sort of 1,900 yard mark, sort of like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling kind of number. Maybe you can sort of push on and be proper 1,200 yard receiver and be a number one receiver for the Colts potentially. Defense, they've got a few nice pieces. They're sort of short of big superstars. Their main one being Shat Leonard, who's back from injury this year. Missed pretty much the entirety of last year. And they signed Samson Ebukam from the 49ers. But they have lost Bobby Okereke at linebacker to the Giants, which is a big loss. That defense, they're really a rebuild team. They've got lots of cap space next year, so if Richardson's play is encouraging this year, it's a big bonus for them because it means they've got a young team and they can really build a team then to compete with Jacksonville with all that cap space next year. And the players I would say to look out for the Colts this year would be Alec Pierce, John Arnie Woods, and Bernard Ryman, who all saw quite a few snaps last year in the rookie years, receiver, tight end, and right tackle. So yeah, just have a look out for them this year. They might have a big impact, and they could be some of the key players in their new rebuild with Anthony Richardson at quarterback.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Michael Pittman's a piece that they'll look to try and sort of build around, if you like. As you say, he probably would be more of a number two, possibly even wide receiver three on a lot of teams. He's probably default number one on this roster, which probably, as you say, sort of speaks to where they are. Offensive line has had decent play for a while. Quinton Nelson's as good as anybody on his day. But certainly some question marks around the rest of the line, particularly on the right-hand side. I think defensively, Shat Leonard's a huge piece. As you say, he missed pretty much all of last year. And he's one of those transformational players that him on that defense all of a sudden potentially turns it from, below average to average, or, below average to maybe even slightly above average, just his presence alone. He's been a hell of a find for them. I think the front seven, if you like, with the line's not too bad. Quitty Pay, they'll be looking to get more out of. DeForest Buckner's been a good pickup from San Francisco, and obviously, as you've mentioned there, Ebukam obviously joins that rotation. I'd be concerned in the secondary, to be honest. I think defensively, the secondary is the one that really stands out as a bit of a glaring weakness. To be fair, potentially starting Brent at cornerback, the rookie they took in the second round, thrusting a rookie into a cornerback starting role, often has mixed results. Let's put it that way. But you look at the rest of the depth chart at corner, there's not a lot else there. and the safeties as well. You're looking at seventh rounder from last year in Rodney Thomas, and then a few unrestricted free agents and that type of thing further on down the line. So I'd be really concerned about the secondary. To be honest, I think that's where they're going to be a real weakness. But as you say, they're in a decent position from a franchise perspective, in as much as if this is the quintessential rebuild, they've got the cap space to do it in terms of next year. They've potentially got the right quarterback. I'll say potentially. Let's not forget he's 6 and 7 in his college career. There's a lot of excitement about his athletic testing, but ultimately 6 and 7 in college. So a lot hinges on him, and whether he can obviously sort of take his athletic ability and transform it onto the pro stage. But yeah, you would suggest a year of rebuild in Indianapolis, certainly.
Yeah, and they're not going to compete this year, but they will be potentially a contender in the AFC South in future. One team that will compete for the title this year are the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're big favourites of the division, actually, after a strong end to 2022, where they reached the divisional round of the playoffs, losing to Kansas City. Trevor Lawrence had a breakout year last year, established himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. It's a good thing for us in the UK here. Obviously, all the Jags get thrown on us as well. It makes them actually interesting. And obviously, they've sold out their game at Wembley as well against the Falcons pretty quickly as well, compared to some other Jags games in recent years. He and Doug Peterson are one of the top, sort of QB head coach duos, and actually, I think it was a great coup for Shad Khan to get him in as head coach, because obviously he's won the Super Bowl with Philadelphia. There's the whole Wentz and Hurts thing, and it just sort of. Unfortunately, someone had to lose their job, whether it was him or Harry Roseman. And I mean, Harry Roseman's gone on to great things, and so has Doug Peterson with his Jags team so far last year as well. And they're getting Calvin Ridley as well, who's back from suspension. So this Jags team, they've got one of the easiest schedules in the league as well. They should be in the playoffs again. You'd like to think if everyone can stay healthy, and I'm really excited to see what Trevor Lawrence looks like this year as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only thing I would say is just let's pump the brakes slightly, because it's almost by default that we have them in this real position of favouritism, and I think that just says as much as anything about the rest of the division as it
Yeah.
does about the Jags. Let's not forget at one stage last year, I think I went to see them at Wembley last year against the Broncos. They lost that game. It was a pretty dire game. I think that dropped them to 6-2 or something at that stage. And it was really a monumental fall away from the Titans, as well as, don't get me wrong, credit where it's due, that good end of season run, as you alluded to, from the Jags, that obviously propelled them into the playoffs, and they, basically became, probably everybody's second team if your team weren't involved in the playoffs, didn't they? Because everybody loves the underdog story. Adding Calvin Ridley's obviously massive. Let's not underestimate how big of a upgrade at wide receiver that is. Christian Kirk, there was a lot of eyebrows raised with the contract that he signed. To be fair, he performed pretty well last year for them. But the real standout was probably Zay Jones, who was probably the unexpected standout. If he can replicate what he did last year, and you had Christian and you add Calvin Ridley to that quartet. What's the name for a three? Right, it's not a quartet.
Triplet,
Trio.
Yeah, trio.
That's
Yeah.
it. Add Calvin Ridley into that trio, and like you say, on paper at least, that looks a pretty formidable duo. I agree. Trevor Lawrence should be where he is. I think he was very, very hyped coming out of college. He was talked about in the same sort of spheres as your Andrew Lucks and your sort of, your surefire number one overall draft picks. And it was good to see. I agree with everything you said about Doug Pederson. Said it plenty of times on this podcast last year. We often do at the start of the season look at all the head coach hires and say, right, who's had the best head coach hire? And I think it was pretty universal that we were all, quite full of praise for that move. And as you say, it proved to come to fruition early doors. So yeah, I think they're rightfully favourites. Don't get me wrong. I would say, and obviously I'll leave the betting expertise to the betting lads, I think they're probably a little bit skinny based on historical. Let's wait and see. I remember Blake Bortles getting them to an AFC sort of championship game, and then they completely fell off a cliff when everybody thought that was going to be the turnaround. So let's just wait and see what happens. But they certainly are primed to be in a good position.
Yeah, and to sort of have that big second season and get into playoffs again, their offensive line needs to be better than it was last year. They lost Jawan Taylor to Kansas City, and they've brought in rookie first round pick Andre Harrison to come in to start a right tackle this time with Cam Robinson at left tackle, but he will miss the first 4 games after being suspended for a PED violation. The offensive line has to be good. They've got Brandon Scherf in there as well, who is a really highly sought after free agent out of Washington a couple of years ago. The offensive line has to be better to protect Lawrence. He got away with it last year a little bit, and again with Jordan Taylor gone is a worry. But hopefully Harrison can come and step in. But that's my only worry with this Jags team, as well as maybe a little bit of pass rush with Trevon Walker. He didn't really have an impact at all last year, other than the 1 overall pick. The offensive line is my worry with Jacksonville. Other than that, I think they're actually quite a team that will go under the radar because their defense is quite good. Played very well last year.
I would have more concerns about the defense than I would the offensive line personally.
Yeah.
Personally, I would. I think, don't get me wrong, I think it's a slightly misleading stat to say that they gave up the 5th least sacks last year because, as you say, Trevor Lawrence was running around a fair bit. So that's one of those stats that you can sort of turn it into whatever you like, so to speak. But for me, I think, again, let's not get away from the fact that it was very much a season of 2 halves, and the NFL is very much a what have you done for me lately type of league. But the Jags, like you say, in terms of the amount of sacks that they actually managed to generate, ranked 25th in the league. So as you say, considering the investment into the pass rush through the draft with high draft picks, all that kind of stuff, not a great deal from it. So that would be one thing that would be concerning. They were 4th, however, in turnovers, so they were quite opportunistic. So from that perspective, that was obviously a good thing. Points allowed, sort of middle of the road for that. I think they ranked about 12th or 13th. So I think it's a defense that could go one way or the other. To be honest, I think so there's a lot of excitement about what the offense brings. But like I say, for me, they'll benefit from the division. Let's not get away from that. We'll talk about the other teams, but as you say, lots of transition at quarterback. They're going to get 6 games potentially against either rookie QBs or first-time starting QBs, that type of thing. So there's potential there that they could have a little bit of a feast. But if I was a little bit down on anything with this Jags side, it would probably be the defensive side of the ball. I wouldn't be as concerned with the line. I think Cam Robinson will be a miss for 4 games, as you say. But overall, like I say, I'd be more concerned on the defensive side personally.
Yeah, what you're hoping is that by the time the playoffs come around, or at least the end of the season, Anton Harrison would have sort of at least sort of solidified himself, got used to the league by the time it comes to that point. I'm a little bit higher on the defense. I like Tyson Campbell at corner. He sort of established himself as like the main corner on that team as well. I like Andre Cisco, who was at Syracuse at safety as well, and Foyesade Olakun at linebacker, and Devin Lloyd, their late first round pick last year as well. Look for him to have a second year impact too. It could be something to keep an eye on. But yeah, it's with the Jags, can their young defense, the likes of Lloyd, Trevon Walker as well, obviously last year's number 1 overall pick, can they step up and help Trevor Lawrence really? Can the line hold up? Other than that, I think Lawrence is by far the best quarterback in the division. And he should get them wins just by that, because of how weak the rest of the division is. But that's the way it goes, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Look, he like you say, if you were sort of starting off and you were sort of giving them, if you like, head starts, you would probably say that Trevor Lawrence probably gives them a head start of 3 or 4 games on everybody else in the division. And that doesn't necessarily sound like a huge amount, but that's quite a significant amount when it comes to an NFL season. So yeah, like I say, I would imagine they will go a minimum 4-2 in the division as a bare minimum. And I think if anybody can go 4-2 in the division or better, it stands to reason that you're going to likely make the playoffs. So I would, like I say, I would fancy the Jags. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to sort of downplay too much. I just think, it's almost an expectation that this will naturally happen. And I suppose all I'm saying is let's just be mindful that, as I say, we've been there before. So let's see if they can actually turn it to fruition this time around.
On to the Houston Texans now, who are hoping to have started to build a contender. You may not say that this year, obviously, because they're still very young, but they've spent their resources now. All the picks they accumulated, they've spent them now, and now it's up to the young guys to take the league by storm. They lost number one overall pick last year after beating the Colts. They drafted CJ Stroud at number 2, who they might have took anyway, I think, because he's much more suited to this system than Bryce Young was. He's the sort of stereotypical Kyle Shanahan QB, fits the West Coast offense perfectly. His accuracy is really good. And Bobby Slowick comes over from San Francisco as OC to join with new head coach D'Amico Ryans. I like what they're building. They spent the money on the O-line, and the O-line is one of the best in the league, because you've got Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, you've got Titus Howard, who you've just paid at right tackle, you've got Shaq Mason at guard, who was in New England for all those years, you've got Kenyon Green, who you drafted last year at left guard as well, and you've got the rookie Juice Struggs at centre. There's one of the the better if he can come in straight away, which recently centers have done. You think of the likes of Creed Humphrey, for example, then that would be a really good offensive line for the Texans. I'd say they're probably a receiver 1 away from a top offense, because they've got the likes of Nico Collins, John Mechie, Robert Woods there. And I mean, Robert Woods is always solid, but he's always been a receiver 2, receiver 3 in the league. And it sounds like rookie Tank Dell will get a lot of snaps in this offense as well at receiver 2. He pretty much tore. The Dolphins in joint practices last week couldn't deal with Tank Dell. And you think about the quarters that the Dolphins have, the likes of Xavier and Howard, and they drafted Cam Smith and the fellow rookie last year, this year as well. Obviously, there's no Jalen Ramsey, but that's saying something. And at running back as well, they had Damian Pierce, who had a really good rookie season last year, and added Devin Singletary as well as a sort of change of pace back as well. A nice backfield duo. I like what the Texans are building. They're not going to do great this year, but obviously they made headlines by trading up to get Will Anderson 3rd overall, given their first for next year to the Cardinals. They've spent their resources now. They've got all this young talent. They're great on the line. They've got Derek Stingley at corner as well. They've spent the resources where they need to be sent. It's just waiting to see if this can actually happen with the Texans, right?
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, I think this is where, like I was saying a minute ago, pump the brakes a little bit on the Jags. And if you rewind the podcast 25 minutes and we talked about the Colts being in rebuild, this is probably exactly what we were saying about Houston 12 months ago. And you're starting to see this come to fruition now. As you say, from an offensive point of view in particular, you would look at the depth chart at the minute, and I know you said probably a number 1 away. You possibly argue, the wide receiver room as a whole overall is the one thing that probably does stand out, as you've just alluded to. I thought Pierce was excellent as a rookie. In terms of the running back, he's very much one that makes the argument that they're a dime a dozen, because he came in and performed extremely well. Like you say, Devin Singletary will give you a 4 yards a carry power running back. He's not going to be anything spectacular, but he's going to come in and do a job. But like you say, is that change of pace kind of guy. The line's brilliant, which is exactly what you want for a rookie QB. If you can build from the trenches, and as you say, they've got first rounders, second rounders, lots of money invested into that line. Laramie Tunsil, correct me if I'm wrong again, becoming like the highest paid.
Yeah, he was highest paid. Yeah.
Yeah, with another restructure. So everything there is looking good. They obviously sort of splashed a bit of cash as well on Dalton Schultz, who was possibly viewed as premier tight end in the free agency class. So certainly from an offensive perspective, lots and lots to like there. And then, as you say, on the defensive side of the ball, it's a similar theme, isn't it? Like you say, Will Anderson, interesting move. That I think that shows a real sign of intent, because it would have been very easy for them to sit there and say, well, we took the rookie QB and, we'll just let the draft play out and we'll see what comes to us. I think, again, that's probably giving you an indication of how the division is viewed, because I think the Texans will be looking at this as an opportunity to say, do you know what, if things click and if we can get things right, it may only take a 9-8 record to win this division, possibly. I don't think this is a division that you're going to have to put 12 or 13 wins on the board to win it. Far from it. So a 9-8 record may well be very, very competitive in this division. And as I say, you would look at this as a young roster going places. And we just had the conversation about Doug Pederson last year. if you were to say to me, take a punt on which one's going to be the best coaching hire, I'll probably go D'Amico Ryans, to be honest. I like his attitude. I like his persona. You certainly can't argue with the results that his defenses have had in the last couple of years. You know, for me, and I think this is key for the Texans, even if this all goes horribly wrong and everything me and you have just said turns out to be absolute crap, and they end up stinking the place out again and they end up with a top 5 draft pick, they need to stick with somebody now, because they've had 3, 4, 5 years now since Bill O'Brien left of chopping, changing, bringing people in for a year, getting rid of them, no consistency. They need to sort of, like I say, get behind somebody now. And for me, D'Amico Ryans should be that guy. I don't think it will be a disastrous season, as I say. I would probably say something along the lines of, a 7-10 record, although that wouldn't be enough to get them into the postseason. I think that will probably be viewed as good progress from where they've been. If they can be picking somewhere in the sort of teens, if you like, come the draft next year, I think that'll be viewed as decent progress for them. But on the flip side of it, I don't think it would be the biggest surprise to see them be the ones to cause the upset in the division. I think most people probably assume it'll be Tennessee if it's not Jacksonville. But if I was to sort of give you my ranking of the teams in the division at the minute, I'd probably have the Texans second, to be honest, because I just think there's a higher ceiling for this unit. So, like you say, we'll ultimately see how it pans out. But yeah, plenty to be optimistic about, I would say.
I agree with you, and is the reason as well is because the system that CJ Stroud is going into is the most QB friendly system in the league. We've seen the likes of Brock Purdy go in there, and I mean obviously it's Kyle Shanahan, not as a play caller, and obviously Stroud's got Bobby Slowick, but it's the same scheme. It's the the Shanahan West Coast offense. You've seen the likes of CJ Beathard, Nick Mullins of success in that scheme as well. Tua, for example, last year taken a huge third year jump. It gets receivers open, and it's basically Stroud's tools are perfect for this scheme as well. So hopefully that will, and the run game as well. Obviously, the run game with Damian Pierce, the Shanahan scheme, the outside zone scheme, it will take away pressure from Stroud as well. So I think he's both him and Bryce Young, who we'll get to later, are in great situations for rookie quarterbacks. To be honest with you, I think both are, and I agree with you. I think the Texans could surprise as well this year. Maybe not get into the playoffs, but certainly have 6, 7, 8 wins, and they're a few pieces away from truly competing. But they have the cap room next year as well to add more players. So now they've got a base. They can only really go up from here, really, I think. So it's an exciting time to be a Texans fan, I'm sure. On to those Titans that you mentioned earlier. They look to be beginning a rebuild. They missed the playoffs last year for the first time since 2018 with Mike Vrabel. The roster isn't what it has been previously as well, and they've got lots of cap space in 2024. They're another team that have sort of got rid of the bigger contracts. They're sort of in an unfortunate situation as well, where they're in a loaded AFC. Because I think this team could actually get in the playoffs in the NFC, but the quarterback position is not great. It looks to be Ryan Tannehill's final year at QB. Yeah, and he'll be playing for another job somewhere else if he can get that. And obviously, you can tell that it is probably the end of Tannehill as well, because they've drafted QBs in the last 2 drafts. It sounds like Malik Willis having a great camp as well. Obviously, they actually chose Josh Dobbs to play ahead of Willis at the end of last year, when Tannehill was out. But it looks like Willis is firmly ahead of Will Levis at the moment, who they took this year in the second round. The receiver room was actually one of the worst in the league, I thought, and then they signed DeAndre Hopkins, which I didn't make sense to me at the time, because it was like, especially for him as well, because I was like, at this point in your career, you're probably going to want a ring, but I kind of like it too, because he got given a big contract from Tennessee, a multi-year deal as well, and just make as much money as possible in your final years. I can also see that point too. And it could be the final year for Derrick Henry as well. He's been, had a few trade shouts recently as well. It looks to be the sort of the beginning of the end of the Titans team that made the AFC Championship game in 2019, doesn't it?
Yeah, like you say, it'd be strange to not see Derrick Henry there, but that day is going to come. I think Ryan Tannehill obviously had an absolutely unbelievable start to his life in Tennessee. when he obviously came in and sort of took them on an excellent run at the end of the 2019 season, carried that into 2020 and to some extent into 2021, but it certainly seemed to take a nosedive last year. I was just looking, actually, I can't believe he's 35. Doesn't
Yeah,
seem like he's been. Doesn't seem
2012 he
like
came into the league.
yeah.
That's
It doesn't
11
seem.
years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's been around that long, does it? But yeah,
But it's because
unbelievable.
he was so average for Miami for so long that it's just. Like, I could safely say as a Dolphins fan that Tua has shown me more in 3 years than Tannehill has, because I don't have the worry of him being a statue in the pocket, because I know that it's because Tannehill cannot feel the pressure whatsoever. That's my only thing with him. Obviously, I think the thing with him as well is because he's not a natural quarterback. He became a quarterback late in college. Obviously, he was a receiver at Texas A&M before he became a quarterback. So I think that maybe that's why. But Tannehill was a good game manager QB, and he's probably a good person to mentor the likes of Willis and Levis, to be fair as well. But it looks like his time as an NFL starter is probably coming to an end.
Yeah, no, it probably has, and I think again we talked about the importance for the Colts of getting the Anthony Richardson move right. You could say the same here for Tennessee. The thing that I would say though in terms of Tennessee, is it does feel like a little bit of panic to take quarterback in back-to-back years. And as you say, Malik Willis in his very limited action last year, he amassed a 1-2 record, completing 50% of his passes. No touchdowns on 3 interceptions. So there's nothing to sort of suggest or convince you that he's going to actually do anything if he does get on the field. Now, like you say, hopefully, from their perspective, if camp has been good, I can't confess to sort of keeping up to tabs with how Tennessee's camp's gone, so I'll take your word on that from what you've just described. But there's obviously a huge difference between training camp and live action, and he just looked a little bit like a rabbit in the headlights when he actually got on the field last year. And I think that'll be the key thing. What's he actually going to look like when he doesn't know the defense that's been called? He's obviously got people that are actually going to hit him full pelt and all of those type of things. So we'll wait and see. It feels to me like a roster that, like you say, the DeAndre Hopkins one. I mean, that screams win now, doesn't it? Because you're paying the guy an awful lot of money, and he doesn't look like the final piece of a jigsaw at all.
It's the same with Julio Jones. That contract didn't make sense at all. They're like, oh, we're going to go win now, so we're going to go pay Julio Jones to come over, and he had little to no impact for Tennessee. He got injured as well, and they paid him a lot of money at that time as well. And I think it was actually more than D Hop's getting here, but it's still I thought he'd go to somewhere like Buffalo or Kansas City and be a number 2 guy, especially with Stephon Diggs wanting out of Buffalo as well. By the looks of things, I thought that would have made a lot more sense to me. But yeah,
but you look at it from the Titans' perspective. Like you say, D Hop was going to take the biggest contract he probably could get, and all
same
the
with
rest of
Dalvin
it.
Cook as well. The Jets offered Dalvin Cook double what the Dolphins did, because the Jets obviously Brees Hall not 100% as well. They really wanted a running back from the start and give him Dalvin $8 million or whatever it was. For the Dolphins, sort of $4.5 million year deal. I think it's just for those things where you're waiting for a contract for so long. At the end of the thing, you're like, we'll take the biggest contract, because I don't think we're going to get anything bigger than that.
Yeah, no, agreed. And like I say, he's not the final piece of the jigsaw. I'd almost describe him as the 4 corner pieces. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're going to have to put the rest of the jigsaw now around him, and he's obviously coming towards the stage of his career where actually, by the time they've got the other pieces in place, is DeAndre Hopkins actually going to be that relevant a piece anyway? So, I find it a strange one. Obviously, the pickup of Treylon Burks in the draft last year, I think the expectation was, or the certainly the sort of expectation for him as a rookie was far too high. In terms of trading away AJ Brown, with him being almost the like for like replacement, was
He
far
was
too.
okay, but he wasn't AJ
No,
Brown level, and that's the thing.
no,
He was still a really good receiver for a rookie last
yeah,
year, but he just wasn't. Didn't do what AJ Brown did. Obviously, reaching the Super Bowl.
no, exactly that, mate, exactly that. So, like I say, that was a strange one last year. So, they're the 2 primary wide receiver options. The line isn't great.
No.
They've obviously put in Skoronski as the first round pick to play one of the guard positions. It's never anything that's going to excite fans, is it, when a guard's taken in the first round? But ultimately, they do need better play on that line. You look at it, got undrafted players. Chris Hubbard starting at right tackle. Chris Hubbard's been in the league forever and a day, and he's bounced around here, there, and everywhere. There's a lot of holes in this roster, as you say. I think defensively as well, outside of a couple of, sort of big names in terms of Kevin Boyd, who I think he's one of the still underrated safeties in the game.
He's been all pro or Pro Bowl so many times in the last 5-10 years. He's always there or thereabouts.
Yeah. And it still feels like he doesn't get the flavours he deserves, to be honest, because whether it's because he plays for Tennessee, he wouldn't be viewed as nationally one of the sort of big teams, so to speak. But he's excellent in the back end of that defence. I think Jeffrey Simmons is decent on the line.
It's been paid as well.
Yeah, and Harold Landry should make a big difference. Missed last year with an ACL, so he'll obviously come back into the linebacker room. So there are some pieces there to work with. I think it's a huge year for Mike Vrabel. I think he's lost a lot of the credit that he would have had built up in the bank in terms of the way last season finished. To lose 7 games on the bounce from a position of absolute dominance. We talked about the Jags run earlier. They were 5 games clear of the Jags.
They played them twice as well. They played them twice. If they went 1-1, they would have been in the playoffs, but they lost both games.
Yeah, 5 games clear. That is a hell of a run, and I think he's essentially still in the role because of the credit that he got. But that credit now, I would suggest, is all gone. And generally speaking, let's be honest, if this is a changing of the guard, what normally happens, quarterback goes, star running back that's been there for the best part of a decade goes. It's like, what? Let's go the whole hog and let's just get a fresh head coach in the door as well. So I think Mike Vrabel is on very dodgy ground this year. And as we've just said, I think we're both in agreement. I would slightly favour the Texans over the Titans at this stage. In terms of, if I was ranking the teams in the division, I don't think there's a huge amount between any of their teams, to be honest. I think Jags probably slightly ahead of the rest, but I don't think it's quite the chasm that people would suggest it is. But certainly the other 3 could finish anywhere. But I would, like I say, probably have the Titans a bit lower down on my personal list. And I think if they do finish outside of the playoffs this year, I'll be very surprised if Mike Vrabel's the head coach if you're doing these season previews this time in 12 months' time.
See, I feel like he will remain around just because obviously he made the playoffs in 2019, 2020, 2021. That's 3 straight playoff appearances, and then 1 year out of the playoffs. I wouldn't say he's in the hot seat, but I think they're certainly gonna rebuild after this year. But I think if you're a Titans fan, as long as Derrick Henry stays healthy and Vrabel can sort of avoiding the streak at the end of last year, if there's still support in that locker room, they'll always be competitive. I think they're still going to get 7 wins or so. It's just I won't honestly be surprised to see them win a division, but without an elite QB, it's very hard to do that in the AFC especially, and the Jags have that, and that's the thing that they're fighting against, which is I think is ultimately Tennessee's sort of worst nightmare. Onto the NFC, we'll go over to the Bucs, who have also lost a quarterback this year. This one, rather than sort of moving on, Tom Brady retired, which made the headlines in the offseason. It looks like it's time to start again with Tampa Bay this year because, obviously they've lost Brady, and I think this season would determine whether it's with Todd Bowles or without Todd Bowles. And that's the thing, really, isn't it? Because he is another person who's on the hot seat. I think he's the favourite to get fired. I think this year, if it's not Dennis Allen and the Saints. Obviously, Brady's gone, and the rest of the roster from the Super Bowl, minus a few players, are still there, but they're all free agents this year. Mike Evans, Devin White, Levante David, Anton Winfield, they're all free agents this year. That's 4 players that were key in the Super Bowl run. And then you've got the likes of Chris Godwin and Shaq Barrett, who are on huge contracts, who are free agents the year after. They're 2 people I can see potentially moved on at the deadline because this Bucs team isn't great. They announced Baker Mayfield as QB today. Actually, he beat out Kyle Trask, which I was surprised about with how obviously he's been there for a few years now. There's always been a lot of talk about Kyle Trask. When Tom was there, Baker obviously it comes in. He'll start. It's probably Baker Mayfield's last chance to become an NFL starter. To be honest with you, what do you think he'll look like in in this Bucs team? Obviously, he's got the receivers, but not much else on offense. And do you think this is his last chance, really? Because if so, I don't think this is the best situation for that either.
It's probably not the best situation, but as you say, I think once you're on to your, third team, as is the case now with Baker Mayfield, you're probably not going to be going into an ideal scenario, are you? I'm a big Baker Mayfield fan from his time at Cleveland. He rejuvenated our franchise, and I think it was an unfortunate injury that he suffered that meant his final season was sort of blighted, if you like, and we'll never know whether he could have got the Browns back to the playoffs as he did in his last full healthy season. I like him as a competitor. He's got one of those attitudes that I think if he's on your team, he endears himself to you. If he's against you, you probably think he's an arrogant or an annoying so-and-so. So I can understand why he rubs people up the wrong way. I'm not overly surprised that he beat out Kyle Trask. I think, Kyle Trask has been in the league, as you say, 3 years now as sort of backup. So, you'd say he was good tutelage because he's obviously had Tom Brady around, but how many players have been Tom Brady's backup and ever actually got on to do anything successful? You can
It's
argue.
just Garoppolo and Brissett, really.
Yeah, and as I say, and you could argue whether even those players that you would deem successful, has it really been? And that's where I was going to go. Garoppolo probably the pick of the bunch. Brissett, he's having a nice little Indian summer to his career, I suppose. But again, not exactly set the world alight, any of them, have they? So I'm not overly surprised that Baker's won it. Like you say, in terms of the receivers, Mike Evans is an absolute standout. We consistently 1,000-yard receiver, obviously record holder in terms of that. Chris Godwin's obviously an excellent receiver. But again, it feels like with a lot of these teams we talk about, rebuild, there's a lot of dead money on that Tampa roster this year. There's £75 million worth of dead
32
money.
million's Brady as well. So
Yeah.
the Baker and Kyle Trask are about $1 million a year each, and then they're paying Brady 32 million a year, which is a big part of that.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing as well. I think they're going to have to move on from the likes of Mike Evans, Devin White, Levante David, Anton Winfield. Because that's 4 players that you can't afford to keep. Probably afford to keep one of them really, and I think maybe Mike Evans might be the one you keep because you can find value at a safety and linebacker. When a receiver, maybe not. But yeah, I don't know. I think this year is a great year for the Bucs to sort of tank in a sense where it's like you got a great opportunity to grab potentially a future franchise QB this year with the 3 or 4 QBs going to be in this draft. And with the way the NFC is as well, if you can grab one of those, then it will put you in a very good position because most of the quarterbacks are in the AFC. So if you, I think for me that makes sense for Tampa. So that's what I'm saying. If you're 2-5 and someone comes in for Chris Godwin or Shaq Barrett, then I can see them being moved at the deadline because you get a few more picks. You're gonna let them go in a year's time anyway. Same with David White and Winfield. It's just I think they'll be big sellers. I don't think. I think this is a start of quite a big rebuild. I think for the Bucs because they're in cap hell, as you say.
Yeah, look, I certainly think there's a chance of that happening. I think the thing that you would say, and obviously, we'll come on to the rest of the teams in this division, is considering how poor of a picture we've necessarily painted there.
They've still got a chance of winning division. Yeah,
you could still make an argument they're the favourites for the division. So, it's a really, really strange division with, like you say, a lot of turnover, a lot of uncertainty. Let's not underestimate how big of a loss losing Tom Brady will be, because ultimately he has, revitalised that franchise for the 3 years that he's played there. They were down in the dumps and hadn't had sort of playoff berth for a while and all those type of things. And, Tom Brady was able to turn that around, wasn't he? So, there's pieces that are there. Tristan Wirfs, probably one of the best linemen that there is. I think when he comes to get his next contract, he will be up there as probably the highest paid, as and when his time comes around. I think the running back situation in terms of Rashad White will be interesting now that there's no Leonard Fournette to steal carries. So see what Rashad White can do defensively. Like you say, I think Shaq Barrett gets a lot of praise for what he does. I think Vita Vea is again probably one of the best defensive tackles. If it wasn't for Aaron Donald, he'd probably be considered the best defensive tackle.
They've got Kalijah Cansey as well to go next to him. They drafted in the first round this year as well. And they got Yaya Diaby, a pass rusher they drafted in the third round as well. They will play a big part in that rotation as well. I think that's the thing with the Bucs. It's just like that the defense is good. The offensive line worries me. Wirfs aside, it doesn't look great, especially Ryan Jensen's missed time. He missed all last year really with the injury as well. And Brady was getting killed back there the end of last year. When the line, obviously all the injuries last year, so that does worry me for Baker's sake. I think they're going to be. I can see them getting between 5 and 9 wins, and 9 wins might get you. I don't think there'll be a wildcard team if either they win the division or they get like the 5th overall pick. I think it's one or the other with this team, and it's just let's see what happens because they've still got the pieces from the Super Bowl. It looks like they're sort of coming towards the end of that time. If it's just whether you go whole hog and tank or you see what you got with Baker, and they'll be an interesting team to follow this year. I think just to see what they do.
They're going to obviously suffer with the schedule. That's obviously the sort of negative, if you like, for the fact
number one
that
schedule, yes. Yeah.
that they won the division, if you like, even with that poor record last year. So you look at the sort of games that they've got to play, outside of the the sort of standard ones that the rest of the division have got. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at a Philadelphia game, I'm looking at a Buffalo game, and I'm looking at a San Francisco game.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 that, if you like, are different from the rest of the division, and that's just 3 losses, isn't it? Let's be honest, that just looks like 3 losses. So whereas the other teams in the division have got 17 games to try and generate some wins. I know it's not as simple and straightforward as that, but certainly from a looking at it on paper perspective, you just look at that and you think, well, do you know what? That's 3 games that I just certainly can't see them getting anything out of. So we'll wait and see what happens with them. Like you say, I wouldn't be surprised. I always say around 500. I'm so used still to the 16-game season that 500 feels like the thing to say. So, like you say, I don't know what the over/under is for them, but I'd imagine it's probably sitting at something like 8.5, probably something like that, because I think they're just a really difficult team to read, as are most in this division.
It's 6.5.
6.5.
Yeah, so maybe go for the over. I think it'll be about 7 wins. So it's just whether you go think it'll be 6 or 7 wins, really, to be honest with you. That's thanks to our guide as well there. Onto a team that I think are going the opposite direction. It's the Atlanta Falcons. And for the first time in a while, they come into the season with a little bit of expectation hanging over them because they're actually one of them and the Saints are the 2 favourites of the division this year. They spent a lot of money on their defense, and their offense might also be better after drafting Bijan Robinson. They've got Desmond Ridder, who will start at QB. He played the last 4 games last year. It'd be interesting to see how he looks. I thought he actually looked okay last year. He didn't turn a ball over at all last year. So he's a very conservative QB. But for a team who runs the ball, the second most in the entire league, it won't be in his hands that often. So there is that as well. I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl with Desmond Ridder, but do I think they win the division with Desmond Ridder from what we saw into last year? Yeah, probably. Decent QB play, and I think they're big favourites of the division personally.
Yeah, no, like you say, he's steady. Like you say, I'm not a huge fan of the phrase game manager, but I understand where it comes from.
Yeah.
So like you say, from a perspective of at least a little bit of consistency there in terms of, I think he's probably likely to be the only QB that was on the sort of team's roster last year that will start in this division.
Mm-hmm.
So he's there. I quite like Taylor Heineke as well. I know obviously he'll start the season as backup, but I think he was being okay when he's had opportunities in Washington previously. Obviously, big things expected of Robinson, because obviously, we've talked a little bit about running backs tonight. Anyone that's going to be taken in the first round is going to have high levels of expectation based on, the perception that you can find them anywhere else. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does. And as you say, I thought Tyler Algier in his limited opportunities last year looked really good. Kadero Patterson has had a bit of a renaissance in his career. He's become more than just a return guy. Certainly got the body type for a running back, hasn't he? He's a right bruiser when he gets going. I don't think Kyle Pitts has necessarily delivered what people thought he would when taken in the first round a couple of years ago. So expect a little bit of a breakout for him. He'll obviously be eligible for a new deal after this year, so he'll be looking to sort of improve his level of production. I think the line's decent. You look at it, you've got 3 first-round picks on there, a second-round pick from this year at left guard in
Jake Matthews as well, who's a multi-year veteran. It's one of the best units in the league as well. It's they re-signed Kellen McGarry and Chris Lindstrom in free agency as well, so they've locked them down for the for the foreseeable future too. So I like those transactions really, because the good O-line for what Arthur Smith wants to do is key.
Yeah, and a little bit like what we said about a couple of these teams in these divisions. I think it's the wide receiver and probably is the one unit that stands out like a bit of a sore thumb that you'd want some investment there. Drake London probably, I wouldn't say outperformed expectations. He came in the first round last year, but I think he was one of those players that a lot of people, he was very polarising, wasn't he? I think a lot of people had him quite high on boards, and then a lot of people had him very low on their boards.
I think it's because size-wise, you could probably class him as a tight end.
That's it. Lots of contested catches was the sort of knock on him, that he relied on jump balls, contested catches. But I actually thought he played pretty well overall last year for a rookie. So they'll obviously be looking to sort of continue that development. But like you say, I think the other thing that's much improved is the defense. They obviously got the big splash in terms of Jesse Bates. Which was a huge pickup. I think he'll obviously come in and he'll be massively upgrading the secondary. Jeff Okuda's sort of renaissance project starts. Obviously, first round pick in Detroit, absolute catastrophe there, but obviously a player in there that's talented. So we'll wait and see whether a change of scenery is the thing that sort of sparks something out of him. He'll obviously join the room with AJ Terrell, who I think has been excellent since
they're
they
both
took him.
In the 2020 class as well. They're both in the same draft class, and Okuda went 3rd overall, and I think Terrell went about 11th. So they're both drafted quite highly. And I preferred Okuda that year. I sort of comped him to another corner who's in this division in Marshall Lattimore, who also didn't have that great of a last year either. But you've now got the opportunity where Okuda's not the number 1 guy, which is good for him. He has Terrell next to him, who has, I think, if he wasn't all pro, he was at least Pro Bowl year before last. So he's had that caliber now, and I think this defense is going to be really good this year, or at least better than it was last year, which is almost the very bottom of the league, because they've added depth as well. They've added the likes of Calais Campbell and David Onyemata to join Grady Jarrett in the interior. That's 3 names there who are quite experienced defensive linemen. And they've added Bud Dupree on the edge as well to get some pass rush. Another person who will play on the edge, but also inside that linebacker is Caden Ellis, who comes over from New Orleans. He's a guy I really like to keep an eye on him because he's really versatile. He's sort of like a Carl Van Noy kind of player. He had a big role in the Saints defense last year, but like I said, he basically played all over the place, and he was PFF's 7th highest graded linebacker as well. So he's a guy to keep a lookout for. And as you said, the big contract to Jesse Bates, they were last for turnovers, if not about 29th for turnovers last year. Jesse Bates is someone who can produce turnovers. We've seen that over his years in Cincinnati. So there's that too. the thing I want to talk about the Falcons is, again, you alluded to it there, the running back room, because obviously they drafted Bijan Robinson, but they've got two guys who you'd think could also start a running back in Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson. It's like, and there's been a lot of talk of whether they trade one of them away potentially, because there are teams who would want a running back, or whether they could potentially play Cordero Patterson as at receiver, because obviously that's what he was brought into the league as. He was a receiver and punt returner, then became a running back in New England and Chicago. That's an interesting thing. What do you think happens in the running back room? Because obviously there are three guys there who are all, they're probably three of the top 20 running backs in the league, and they're all in the same room.
I think in terms of Patterson, I think because he's that sort of Swiss Army knife, he can do a little bit of everything. I think they'd be very, very reluctant to move on from him.
He's number one on the depth chart as well. And Robinson's number 3. I don't know if you can read too much into that, but that's what it is at the moment, which is interesting.
Yeah, we'll wait and see when the season rolls around. I think, look, I don't think they're under any pressure in terms of, there wouldn't be any necessity to trade any of these guys away from a cap space perspective. How much value were they likely to get? Algier, like I say, had a reasonable showing in limited opportunities last year. He had a particularly good game against Cleveland, which is why he stands out to me. He was particularly impressive that day. But in terms of his cap space, he's basically almost on the rookie minimum, I believe. So they're not going to be under any pressure to sort of release or move on from him. I imagine all three will stick around. To be honest, I think it'll be a nice room there. It takes a little bit of pressure instantly off Robinson as well, because as I say, expectations will be high. And I also think the thing that will work in the favour of that room is potentially that lack of depth in the receiver department. Unless they can get a player-for-player trade where it's potentially a sort of bit of a flyer, if you like, on a 5th or 6th wide receiver on somebody else's depth chart that potentially might be a roster casualty or a cap cut down the line that they might be able to get their hands on that they particularly are interested in, to give them a bit more depth there. But I would be surprised if those three aren't on the depth chart come week 1.
Well, you mentioned the receiver room as well, and what we've actually got in the receiver room is run blockers, because they've got Drake London, who's 6'4", run blocker. Obviously, you've got Kyle Pitts, a tight end. You've also brought in Matt Collins from the Raiders, who's another 6'3" plus receiver, who's a great run blocker and a special teamer as well. He's huge. He had a great year in Vegas last year. I'm surprised they didn't sign him, re-sign him really, because he obviously he was with Miami as well, with Flores, so he's sort of that New England style guy that they do like. But yeah, I think this team is built to run the ball, and with a quarterback who's essentially a rookie in Desmond Ridder, I can see where it's like, if you keep all three guys in, then you probably will. I think they ran the ball about 55% of the time last year, maybe even be higher than that this year. So you never know. And that's quite a commitment to the run. But if it works, and obviously Arthur Smith has proved that it does work, then why change it?
Look, like I said, I'm a huge running back fan, mate. So you're preaching to the converted with me. It's, for me, if it works, like you say, if you can average 4 or 5 yards a carry, well, my maths is quite simple. 3 times 4 is 12 yards. You're getting a first down every time that you need to move the chain. So, like you say, if you've got the talent that's there to be able to do it, there's nothing more demoralising for the opposition than being ran all over. We've all sat there and watched a game where our team can't stop the run, and it is the most frustrating thing to watch in the world. It's demoralising. You don't like getting beaten anyway, but a 60-yard pass through the air, and all of a sudden your offense are back on the field within 30 seconds. 10 6-yard runs that have chewed up 6 or 7 minutes of clock, and your defense are gassed, and you as a fan are exasperated, is a real killer. So, like you say, if they can commit to it, then good luck to them. I'm certainly happy I picked up Bijan Robinson in our dynasty league. That's one advantage of being absolutely shite at fantasy football. You get to add some talent to your roster. So yeah, I'm hoping for big things from Robinson and this run game.
That's the thing as well with the Falcons. They were still in pretty much all the games last year because they could frustrate the opponent. They won 7 or 8 games. They were still in the division race to the very end as well. The style does frustrate the other teams, as you say. Onto a team that are embarking on a big new era this year. The Carolina Panthers, they got the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young, after trading up with Chicago in the offseason. And he goes into a phenomenal situation for a rookie QB as well. They were almost a playoff team last year after a bump with interim head coach Steve Wilkes after moving on from Matt Rule at the start of the year. Obviously got Frank Reich coming in as head coach. He's a great offensive play caller. And although Young no longer has DJ Moore, they have built actually a nice sort of receiving core around him in the likes of Adam Thielen, DJ Chark. They've got Jonathan Mingo as well, the rookie, who's got a bit of size that they're really excited about as well from camp. And he's also got a good guy to learn from in backup Andy Dalton as well. So he's in a pretty good situation for a number 1 overall pick, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, it's not the worst environment for him to come into. As you say, that room of receivers has got a bit of nous about it in terms of people that have been there, done it, and got the T-shirt. And as you say, it's got a little bit of excitement as well in terms of the rookie Mingo. They've got some speed in there as well with people like Wims. LaVisca Chenault comes over from Jacksonville. Who'll add an element of pace there as well. So it's not the worst environment, as you say. Hayden Hurst at tight end. Miles Sanders at running back. So as you say, there's certainly worse scenarios that I've seen a number 1 draft pick come into. I think it's a big year for Frank Reich. You just said there, he's great offensive mind, and he will have a little bit of a stink attached to him from the way things finished in Indianapolis. You don't normally get 3 opportunities at head coaching gigs, so this is a huge season for him. Again, for me, they're just a really difficult team to read because they could finish 5-11 or 5-12, whatever the maths is, 5-12, Sean, and they could finish 12-5, and would I be particularly surprised either way? Probably not, because again, I just find them incredibly difficult to read. But like I say, in terms of Bryce Young, certainly coming into a favourable environment, and I think they will ultimately commit to him. But as you say, worse backups to have than Andy Dalton, who, the jokes are, of course, he's Mr. Average, but average may well be enough to win this division this year, as we've alluded to with the other teams that we've looked at. So if Bryce Young comes in and it's an absolute car crash for the first month of the season, there's nothing to stop them making that change. It doesn't mean their long-term commitment to him disappears.
No.
But they potentially have the luxury to say, well, look, it's not quite working out as we wanted to. Let's get you on the bench. Let's get you learning the playbook more. Let's get you seeing Andy out there on the field, that type of thing. So encouraging signs for Carolina. Probably, if you were comparing this to the NFC, to the AFC equivalent division, probably feels a little bit like we were saying about the Texans. Probably feel a little bit further into the rebuild stage already. So yeah, certainly things that are set up for success.
I think whether they sort of win the division or not really rests on their defense, because it's whether it can stay healthy or not, because it's really talented. You've got Ejiro Evero coming in from Denver as defensive coordinator. Obviously, he got head coaching interviews at the end of last year as well, after basically saving the Broncos season, really, because of how disasterful that Nathaniel Hackett offense was. But they've got the talent to possess a top 10 defense, because should the likes of JC Horn and Brian Burns stay healthy, because they're 2 cornerstone pieces to have at corner and edge. And it's a big year for him as well, because in Evero's defense, there's a different scheme how they operate. That's the thing. They've got probably one of the best linebacker duos in the league, actually, in Shaq Thompson and Frankie Louvu. They've added to the defense as well. The likes of Von Bell coming over from Cincinnati, and Shai Tutu coming in at defensive lineman to join Derek Brown, who has been quite a successful top 10 pick recently as well. The defense is quite young, but it's always been talented. It's got really banged up over the last couple of years, and that kind of cost Matt Rule his job, really, as well, because it was time-starved quarterbacks going through, but the defense, well, Horn and Burns especially, just couldn't stay on the field. So I think that's where the season sort of goes. I think the only thing that worries me, other than potentially the defense staying healthy, is the offensive line, because Bryce Young's been beat up in the preseason game so far. Taylor Maton at right tackle's fine because he's been there years. He's he's the leader at the line, but it's whether the likes of Kwanu at left tackle and Cade Mays at guard can take second year jumps really this year. I think they got a shot at reaching the playoffs, not as much as the Falcons or potentially the Saints we'll get into in a minute. But I think they could surprise should the defense stay healthy.
Yeah, like you say, I quite like the defense. There's lots of pieces to build around there, as you say. Burns, Horn, Jeremy Chinn's another one that I'd probably put into that category. Yeah, Derek Brown, like you say, has been stellar at the defensive tackle position. I think the pickups of Tuttle and Justin Houston give them that sort of veteran presence as well, which potentially has been, and Von Bell, who you mentioned. There's three really good quality sort of veteran additions to that defense there. Plenty to be encouraged about, as you say. If I was sitting in Carolina's sort of fan base, I agree in terms of the offensive line, but ultimately, every team in the NFL has got weaknesses. If every team had a stellar depth chart from 1 to 22 on the starting positions, there'd be a little bit of skullduggery going on. So there's obviously going to be weaknesses somewhere, but ultimately, I think, as we've said, not the worst situation for Bryce Young to come into. And I can see, as I say, I wouldn't be surprised to see them with a winning record, as much as I wouldn't be surprised to see them with an under 500 finish either. So difficult team to read. Sound like a broken record, don't I? Difficult team to read.
It just shows how close these divisions are going to be, actually, doesn't it? Really. On to the Saints. We'll finish with them. They're one of the teams that, again, I can believe will either be 10 or 11 wins or 4 or 5 wins, because they still got loads of stars kicking around from their sort of Super Bowl window at the end of Drew Brees' career. They had that amazing draft class in 2017 that sort of kicked everything off. It's a massive year for Dennis Allen because his defense has been good, but the offense has been not great the last couple of years. Last year it wasn't really. And obviously, it's looking like it's either they win with Derek Carr, who they brought in from Vegas, or they probably rebuild because that window has come to an end really now. So they signed Derek Carr at the start of the offseason. Obviously, he's now I think he's now in a competent organization. You'd like to think, rather than the Raiders, who have been a mess for forever. It feels like for a while anyway. And Dennis Allen, actually former Raiders head coach as well. Obviously this is a second opportunity. They weren't great last year. Derek Carr's basically been brought in to bring the Saints to the playoffs, and if they don't, then you sort of have to ask questions really, because you'd like to think that he should be able to lead this team to the division title. It's the massive year for Derek Carr because obviously he's been cast aside by Josh McDaniels, but I don't think that's a great idea because I think he's a better quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo personally. But it's a big year for Derek Carr, isn't it? Really,
it's a huge year, and I think we said about Trevor Lawrence probably gives the Jags the heads up in the AFC. Realistically, on paper, Derek Carr gives the Saints the leg up in the NFC side of this division, doesn't he? So, I'm a big Derek Carr fan. I think he's one of those quarterbacks that ultimately he falls into that above average, but probably not quite elite tier, which is always that really polarizing position because you still end up paying him as though he's elite, even though he doesn't necessarily get you all the way that you want to go.
He can reach a Pro Bowl, but not all pro, that kind of thing. It's like... Yeah.
So, but as you say, in terms of the roster itself, Chris Olave, I thought was excellent as a rookie. Really, really good. So he'll be back. Traquan Smith's been around for a few years now. Seems to always get involved in the offense. Michael Thomas is the big enigma, isn't he?
He's back. It's like but the question is really how long until he gets hurt, because he's played 136 snaps since 2020, where he broke the single season receptions record. You just have to wonder how long until he gets hurt. If he can stay healthy, then I think the Saints could be on to a winner because you've got him, you've got Olave, you've got Rashid Shaheed in there as well. They've actually got a pretty decent receiving corps when he's on the field. The problem with the Saints is their players can't stay healthy. The Michael Thomas is the Alvin Kamara's that they can't build around them for a whole season because they're going to miss time. It's the same with Terron Armstead when he was there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But like you say, if he's on the field, and let's assume for the moment that he is, he's certainly not injured as we speak. Potentially it is just like gaining a new signing in like the equivalent English football terminology, isn't it?
Yeah.
So he could be a huge piece for them. I think the line's pretty good. The Saints line's been pretty good for a while. You'd expect it to be with the investment that's gone in through the draft in recent times. Ramchick, Pete, Cesar Ruiz, Trevor Penning, all
Yeah,
first round
last year.
picks. So you'd expect a decent level of play. I think Jamal Williams is an underrated pickup at
I really
running
like
back.
it. I really do. I've been saying, pick him up in fantasy because obviously Alvin Kamara misses the first 3 games through suspension anyway, and he's likely to miss another game at the in the season anyway. And we've seen with Kamara and the likes of Mark Ingram, like the Saints always like to have a second running back, especially between the tackles as well when you need a first down. Give it to the likes of Mark Ingram, Latavius Murray. Now it'll be Jamal Williams, and he'll get you that first down. He's always going to, I think, judging by what it was with Sean Payton, and obviously Pete Carmichael was there with Sean Payton before anyway. This offense is very much a 2-back offense, and I think Jamal Williams is a person to pick up for fantasy as well because I think he's going to get significant carries in this offense.
Yeah, really like him. I think he had an excellent season at the Lions last year. So I think that's a really astute pickup. So I've not got many concerns offensively. The concern I'd have from the Saints' perspective is defensively. I think the defensive side of the ball,
It's changed a bit.
Yeah, it's changed a bit. And to be honest, when you look at the sort of key contributors, it's like how long can Cam Jordan keep going? He's approaching
It's only contract actually, which surprised me.
but it's like he's now in year 13 in the
Yeah.
NFL. Which is it's a testament to his longevity. When again he's probably another one that doesn't necessarily get the flowers that he deserves for his career because he's been absolutely stellar for them. I thought Demario Davis has probably been one of the premier linebackers for the last sort of 5 years since he signed there. And
He was
again,
second team All Pro last year as well.
But again, to the casual fan, he's probably a player that just goes under the radar.
Yeah.
Not many people will know about him outside
Since
the fans.
Breeze has gone as well, especially since Breeze has gone.
Yeah, and you mentioned him earlier. Obviously, Marshawn Lattimore would be the other one. So you look at the 3 sort of key players, if you like, at the 3 levels of the defense, and they're all, sort of getting on in terms of their NFL career and experience and contracts. And the rest of the defense, there's not a huge amount outside of that. Tyrann Mathieu, obviously a name that everybody will know. But again, he's another one. I think you're going into year 12 or year 13 as well. So it's like there's that will be the concern for me. Would be the defensive side of the ball. I think offensively they should be fine. Particularly like you say, once Kamara comes back from the suspension, they've got that 2-pronged attack. If Michael Thomas can stay fit, there's just a number of ifs, isn't there? This is what we're saying. There's a number of ifs. If all of these things fall into fruition, I would probably have the Saints as a couple of game favourites in this division, based on, like I say, the strength of our offence and the fact that, as we alluded to with Lawrence and the Jags, I think Carr's the equivalent in this division. But if all of a sudden you take a piece or 2 out of that offence, I would have concerns. So again, they're another team that could easily end up first in this division, could end up fourth in this division. I think as much as from a quality standpoint, it's probably one of the weakest divisions. I don't think you're going to get anybody probably even approaching 10 or, probably approaching 11 wins or more. I think, anybody that gets to double digits will comfortably win this division. But certainly from an interest and intrigue and a competitive standpoint, all 4 teams are very sort of similar to each other. So that at least should stand for some entertaining football throughout the course of the season in this NFC South.
Yeah, and I think it's just whether everything goes into place for the Saints. That's the thing, really, because it never has really, not for a while anyway. The defense, like what you mentioned, it will look different because they lost the likes of Marcus Davenport to the Vikings, Caden Ellis to the Falcons, David Onyemata to the Falcons as well. They've brought in Caden Saunders and Nathan Shepard in the interior, and they drafted Brian Brissy as well. So they've sort of focused on the interior of the defensive line. But the pass rush does worry me because other than Cam Jordan, you've got Carl Granderson, he went undrafted in 2019, played a bit of a role last year. And then you got the 21 first rounder, Peyton Turner, as well, who's basically been non-existent since he came into the league. He's now going to have a massive role. It's whether he can actually make the step up there. And then you've got second round rookie Isaiah Foskey as well. The edge rushers, that does worry me a little bit because it's for a while it's been the same. We've had top defense. Dennis Allen's defense obviously it got him the job. Now the unit's changed. How he's basically coaching the defense. I think probably save his job. I think that's ultimately what it is, because if you're a defensive head coach and your defense sucks, and that's not great at all, is it? And so that's what I think you should follow the Saints this year. But they are as talented as anyone, probably more talented than the Falcons. I'd say it's just if everything can fall into place, and I put them as favourites division, it's just whether it actually will or not. That's the real question. But that pretty much sums up the NFC and AFC South. Sorry, motorbike's going past you, probably hear that. That is the end of our 2023 division previews. Obviously, Shaun, you've done 2 of them. It's been great to have you on for both of them as well. We've got some nice content coming up over the next couple of weeks. We're doing some ranking stuff, and obviously the all important season predictions as well. So stay tuned for them. We're going to have probably 4 or 5 podcasts before the season starts. In what is it? 16 days time, so it's not very long at all now. The season is approaching, but like I said, it'd be nice to have you on again, Shaun, and you're always welcome back on at any time.
Pleasure, mate. Been good to chat some balls. Like I say, it's got me in the mood for the season starting. It always does. It always feels like a really long off season, doesn't it? But once we start talking about it in pre-season, thankfully we'll very shortly be in the rear view mirror. We can really look forward to it, and look forward to meeting you, mate, on the 10th of September down in Birmingham. Can't stress that enough for everybody listening. Appreciate it's an effort for people to sort of commute to these things, but as I say, it's a free event. It'd be great to see people there. We've had a lot of support over the years in terms of the channel and everything, so good way for us to pay back. And like you say, in today's day and age, to get a freebie, you don't get much for free, do you? So yeah, it'd be great to meet a few, mate. And looking forward to meeting yourself, other than on the other end of a computer screen. So thanks for having me on, bud, and look forward to hearing all the content between now and kickoff.
No worries at all, mate. It's like I said, it's been great to have you on. That's the end of this episode. It's the end of our division previews as well. You can now stream them all on YouTube as well. They're all in a playlist, so you can watch them back to back to back, which would be great as well if you're really in that sort of binging mood. But that'll do us today. You'll be listening to the Full 10 Yards NFL podcast.